There is a moment out on the open savanna when everything goes quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of an empty afternoon, but the kind of silence that settles over a landscape when something is about to happen. When the grass stops moving, not because the wind has died, but because every animal within half a kilometer has decided, all at once, to hold perfectly still. A cheetah is feeding. She is crouched over a Thompson's gazelle she brought down 20 minutes ago, working quickly the way cheetahs always do, because a cheetah that lingers is a cheetah that loses. She knows this. Every cheetah knows this. The kill belongs to whoever holds it, and in the African bush, possession is a temporary thing at best. She tears at the carcass with practiced efficiency. Her ribs are showing slightly, the way they always do after a long run, and her breathing has only just begun to settle from the explosive sprint that ended the gazelle's life. She needs this meal. She has been hunting since early morning, has missed twice already, and the afternoon heat is building in a way that makes the idea of another chase deeply unappealing. She does not see the two jackals. Not yet. They are coming from the north, moving low and deliberate across the grass, and they are doing something that is easy to miss if you are not watching for it. They are not rushing. They are not making noise. They are not doing any of the things that would draw a cheetah's attention before the moment is right. They are moving the way water moves around a stone, finding the path of least resistance, staying just below the line of the cheetah's peripheral vision, and somewhere behind them, 400 meters back, sitting in the dry grass as if they have not a care in the world, are 6 more jackals, waiting. If you have ever spent time watching jackals, truly watching them, you begin to understand that these animals are operating on a level that most wildlife documentaries do not fully capture. We talk about lions. We talk about wild dogs. We spend hours watching leopards drag carcasses into trees. But the jackal, that medium-sized, golden-coated, sharp-faced creature that seems to be everywhere on the African savanna, and nowhere in particular, the jackal is doing something far more interesting than most people give it credit for. It is thinking. Not in the way we think, not with language and abstraction, but with a kind of tactical awareness that is startling when you see it play out in real time. Jackals understand deception. They understand coordination. They understand, perhaps most remarkably of all, the value of patience, of waiting, of letting 2 members of the group carry the risk while the rest stay back, stay hidden, stay ready. What you are about to watch is not a lucky opportunistic theft. It is a plan. And before we go any further, if you have ever found yourself genuinely fascinated by animal behavior, by the kind of intelligence that lives in the wild, raw, and unassuming, and absolutely ruthless, then you are exactly where you should be. Subscribe if you have not already, because this is the kind of story that rewards close attention. Let us go back to the beginning. The morning had started with dew still sitting on the grass and a sky just beginning to lighten over the eastern horizon. In this part of the savanna, the hours around dawn belong to the hunters. The temperature is still low enough to make a sustained chase possible. The light is good enough to see, but not so harsh that it burns through the cover of low vegetation, and the prey animals, still shaking off the night, have not yet fully switched into their midday vigilance. The cheetah had been moving since first light. She is a female, 4 years old in the prime of her hunting life, and she hunts alone the way most adult female cheetahs do, outside of the period when they have cubs. She had been working a herd of Thompson's gazelles for nearly 2 hours, quartering across the grass, using a low acacia thicket as cover while she assessed the herd. She was not interested in the strong ones. She was looking for hesitation, a slight lameness, a moment of distraction. The one animal in the group that was, for whatever reason, fractionally less alert than the rest. Cheetahs are not built for long struggles. Their bodies are optimized for one thing, a short, blistering burst of acceleration that reaches speeds of up to 112 kilometers per hour. They cannot sustain a chase for long. They cannot wrestle prey to the ground the way a lion can. They do not have the jaw strength to hold a large animal in a suffocation grip for more than a few minutes without exhausting themselves completely. Everything about a cheetah's hunting strategy is built around one principle: hit fast, hit right, and then rest. Which is why what happens after the kill is, in some ways, more important than the kill itself. She had finally made her move just after 7 in the morning. A young gazelle, a male, maybe 18 months old, had drifted slightly away from the edge of the herd. The cheetah had gone from stationary to full speed in under 3 seconds. The gazelle had bolted, zagging hard to the left, then sharper right, the way gazelles do, trying to use their agility against the cheetah's raw pace. But she had read the movement, adjusted her angle, and caught the animal with a trip that sent it tumbling. She was on it before it could recover, closing her jaws around its throat. It was over in 4 minutes. She dragged the carcass maybe 15 meters into slightly longer grass, not enough to hide it, not enough to give her real cover, but enough to satisfy something instinctive, the desire to be out of the most open ground. Then she began to feed. The 2 jackals had been watching from the moment she started her stalk. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because it changes how we understand what follows. The jackals were not wandering past and stumbling onto a free meal. They had been observing. They had watched the cheetah choose her target. They had watched the chase. They had watched the kill. And while the cheetah was doing all of this, the jackals were doing their own calculations. How far is she from cover? How exposed is the carcass? How long has she been running? How tired is she? What is the size of the kill relative to what we can carry or consume quickly? These are not conscious calculations in any human sense, but they are real assessments, built up through years of individual learning and generations of evolutionary refinement. A jackal that makes poor assessments of these variables does not eat as often. A jackal that makes good ones survives a little more reliably, raises slightly more offspring, and passes those assessment tendencies forward. Evolution, running its slow and patient experiment. The 2 jackals that began moving toward the cheetah's kill were both adults, one male, one female, and they had almost certainly worked together before. The approach they were using, low body posture, indirect angle, pauses timed to the moments when the cheetah's head was down in the carcass, was not random. It was the kind of approach that only works if both animals are doing the same thing at the same time, without any visible communication between them. Behind them, across 400 meters of open grass, 6 other jackals sat and watched. Now here is what is genuinely extraordinary about this, and it is worth saying clearly, because it is easy to gloss over the detail in favor of the drama of what comes next. Those 6 jackals were not following their own instincts to move toward food. They were holding back. They were suppressing the impulse to close in on a meal that they could presumably see and smell, and they were waiting for a signal that had not yet come. The group was operating as a unit, with a division of labor that assigned specific roles to specific individuals, and everyone else staying in position until the situation changed. This is cooperation. Not the incidental cooperation of a pride of lions all feeding on the same kill, where the social structure more or less enforces proximity and feeding order. This is something more deliberate. 2 animals take the risk. The rest conserve energy and avoid detection, and the timing of when the rest move in is not random either, as we will see. The cheetah was feeding steadily when the first jackal got within 30 meters. She stopped, raised her head. Her ears rotated toward the movement. A single jackal at 30 meters is not, by itself, a catastrophic threat to a cheetah. Cheetahs will, on occasion, chase jackals away from a kill with some success. They are faster in a short burst, longer-legged, and while they lack the weapons of a lion or leopard, a determined cheetah can usually send a lone jackal retreating quickly enough. The problem is that chasing uses energy, and energy spent chasing jackals is energy not spent feeding, and not spent recovering from the sprint that brought this meal down in the first place. Cheetahs are, in this sense, always in debt. The cost of the hunt must be paid back by the feed that follows, and if the feed is interrupted enough times, the debt accumulates in ways that eventually become dangerous. This is why a cheetah that abandons a kill without having fed adequately may find itself in serious trouble within 24 to 48 hours. The jackal sat down. It did not run. It did not approach. It sat, at 30 meters, and stared. This is a tactic that sounds almost absurdly simple, but its effectiveness lies in what it does to the cheetah's decision-making. A jackal sitting still at 30 meters is not a threat the cheetah can easily justify chasing, because the energy expenditure of the chase might not be worth it, especially when there is a second jackal that the cheetah had now registered, coming in from a slightly different angle. 1 jackal in front of her, 1 jackal to her left. The cheetah vocalized, a high-pitched churring sound, the kind cheetahs make when they are anxious rather than aggressive. She turned her head between the 2 jackals, weight shifting forward slightly, body language suggesting she was on the edge of a decision. The first jackal moved forward 5 meters. The cheetah spun and rushed it, stopping short in a half-charge that sent the jackal skittering back. But while she was facing that direction, the second jackal had covered 10 meters. Now it was 20 meters from the carcass. The cheetah turned back, made the same half charge at the second jackal. Skitter, retreat. She went back to the carcass and fed for 45 seconds, head down, working quickly, aware that the situation was deteriorating. Both jackals were now repositioning, circling wider, forcing her to keep splitting her attention. The coordination here is not accidental. The two jackals were working in opposition to each other in a way that maximized the cheetah's psychological pressure. Every time she faced one, the other advanced. Every time she charged, she was turning her back on the other. The cheetah was not losing ground because she was weak or unskillful. She was losing ground because she was one animal, and the plan being run against her required two. 40 meters away, unseen by the cheetah, the 6 jackals had risen to their feet. They had not yet moved closer, but they were watching. And something in the way the 2 lead jackals were moving, something in the rhythm of advances and retreats, was telling them that the calculation was shifting. The moment was approaching. What happens next unfolds over less than 90 seconds, and it is worth describing it slowly, because speed is the mechanism that makes it work. The female jackal made a sudden, committed dash directly for the carcass. Not a cautious advance, a full run. The cheetah whipped around and gave chase, covering the ground between them in a burst that any other animal would find terrifying. But the jackal was not trying to reach the carcass. She was trying to draw the cheetah away from it. She jinked hard, cutting back at an angle that no cat's body is designed to follow at full speed, and the cheetah overshot, slipping on dry grass, losing a second trying to reorient. 1 second was all that was needed. The male jackal had not run away. While his partner was being chased, he had sprinted straight to the carcass, closed his jaws around a section of the gazelle's hindquarters, and pulled, hard, fast. He was moving before the cheetah had finished her skid. The cheetah realized what had happened and reversed, sprinting back toward the carcass. But the male jackal was already pulling the hindquarter section away from the main body, and at this point, something remarkable happened. The 6 jackals at 400 meters began to run. Not a cautious trot. A full-out sprint, closing the distance in a matter of moments. And when the cheetah saw them coming, that tide of golden bodies flowing across the grass from every direction, she made the calculation that every animal makes when the odds shift past a certain point. She left. Not in a panic. Cheetahs do not panic in the way we might imagine. She moved away at a brisk walk, stopping twice to look back, and the look she gave the scene was not rage or frustration so much as a kind of resigned reassessment. She was still breathing harder than normal. She had not fed enough. She would need to hunt again before the day was out. The jackals converged on the carcass. There was brief, intense competition among the group for the best feeding positions. A great deal of noise and snapping, and small aggressive displays, but no serious injury, no extended fighting. The social hierarchy within the group asserted itself quickly, and within a few minutes all 8 jackals were feeding, the 2 that had run the risk getting access to the best portions. The whole operation, from the moment the 2 lead jackals began their approach to the moment the cheetah walked away, had taken just under 11 minutes. Now let us talk about what we actually witnessed, because there is a tendency in wildlife storytelling to describe something like this and move on, leaving the audience with a sense of wonder, but not a deeper understanding of what the behavior means or why it is genuinely significant. The jackal Canis mesomelas, the black-backed jackal, is one of the most successful medium-sized carnivores in Africa. It is found across 2 distinct populations, one in East Africa and one in Southern Africa, and its success is built not on size or strength but on cognitive flexibility, the ability to read a situation and respond to it in ways that maximize gain while minimizing risk. Jackals are omnivores in the truest sense. They eat insects, they eat fruit, they eat carrion, they hunt small mammals and birds, and they steal from other predators. This dietary flexibility is partly physiological and partly behavioral, and the behavioral component is where things get interesting. Studies of jackal foraging behavior have documented something that researchers sometimes call role differentiation, the consistent tendency within a group for different individuals to take on different functions during a complex task. It is the same phenomenon observed in wolves, in dolphins, in certain species of corvid. 1 or 2 individuals run the active risk. Others hang back, conserving energy and maintaining the element of surprise. And the timing of when the passive group moves in is triggered by specific cues from the active individuals. What makes the savanna jackal theft particularly elegant is the geography of it. 400 meters is not an arbitrary distance. It is far enough that the cheetah's vision, which is excellent, does not register the group as a coherent threat. A single jackal at that distance is background noise. 6 jackals at that distance, stationary in dry grass, are nearly invisible. The cheetah's focus was entirely on the 2 animals immediately around her, which was precisely the point. The use of distance as a strategic tool is not something we talk about often in the context of animals like jackals, and it should change the way we think about what intelligence means in the natural world. We have a tendency to associate intelligence with brain size, with tool use, with the ability to solve puzzle boxes in a laboratory. But intelligence, in the evolutionary sense, is about effectiveness. It is about solving the problems your environment presents with the resources you have available. And the problem the jackals were solving on that particular morning, how to take a meal away from a larger, faster, and in direct confrontation, more dangerous predator, was not a simple problem. It required the ability to assess the predator's state. It required coordinated movement between multiple individuals. It required some members of the group to override their immediate impulse to approach food, and instead hold their position until the right moment. That is sophisticated behavior by any measure. The black-backed jackal typically forms monogamous pairs that hold territories and raise offspring together, and pair bonds in this species are genuinely strong, maintained over multiple breeding seasons. The pair unit is the fundamental social structure, but jackals are not rigidly solitary the way cats tend to be. Young from previous litters will sometimes remain with their parents for a year or more, functioning as helpers that assist with pup care, territorial defense, and foraging. This helper system matters enormously to the story we are telling. A group of 8 jackals working together on a kill theft is not 8 unrelated individuals that happen to converge. In many cases, these groups are family units, parents and offspring of different ages, animals that know each other's tendencies, have hunted together before, have established, through experience, who takes the lead in a face-to-face confrontation and who holds back. The female jackal that drew the cheetah's charge, the one who ran and jinked and absorbed the risk of that full-speed pursuit, was not doing something she had never done before. That move, the decoy run, was likely a behavior she had refined over multiple attempts, against multiple predators, in multiple situations. Animals learn, and what they learn, if it works, they do again. This is the mechanism through which animal behavior becomes what we call strategy. Not conscious planning in the human sense, but learned, refined, and sometimes shared patterns of action that solve real problems in the real world. There is another dimension to this worth exploring, and it concerns the cheetah rather than the jackals. The cheetah's decision to abandon the kill rather than fight for it is not, as it might first appear, a failure of nerve. It is a calibrated response to a genuine threat assessment. Cheetahs have been seriously injured by jackals in extended confrontations, and more importantly, cheetahs rely on their physical condition in a way that other large predators do not. A lion with a leg wound can still pull down prey. A leopard with a broken claw can still ambush and suffocate. But a cheetah with any significant injury to its legs, feet, or spine is effectively dead, because a cheetah with impaired locomotion cannot run at 100 kilometers per hour, and a cheetah that cannot run does not eat. The cheetah's apparent submissiveness in the face of jackal harassment is not weakness. It is a long-term survival calculation. Abandon this kill, hunt again later, and live to breed. Fight 8 jackals for a gazelle carcass that is already partially consumed, risk a bite or a scratch that turns septic in the African heat, and potentially never hunt again. When we frame it that way, the cheetah's response looks less like defeat and more like wisdom. And yet, there is something deeply affecting about watching her walk away, about the way she stops and looks back, once, twice. She ran this gazelle down through extraordinary physical effort, and now she is walking away with nothing. The jackals are eating her meal with the completely unsentimental focus of animals that deal in survival, not fairness. The savannah does not do fairness. It does efficiency, it does adaptation, it does the relentless testing and retesting of every strategy every animal uses to stay alive, and the strategies that work persist, and the ones that do not are quietly eliminated over generations. The jackal strategy worked today. Let us think for a moment about how rare it actually is to observe a theft like this, documented from beginning to end, with all 8 jackals accounted for, and the role of the distant group understood as part of the plan rather than incidental. Most theft events we observe in nature are opportunistic. A hyena scavenges a lion kill when the lions move away. A vulture drops onto a carcass the moment a predator's back is turned. These are real and interesting behaviors, but they are primarily reactive. The animal responds to an opportunity that presents itself. What we observed with these jackals was different in a specific and important way. The 6 jackals at 400 meters were not responding to an opportunity. They were waiting for one to be created by the actions of their group members. They were participants in a plan they themselves were not executing at the front end. This distinction between reactive opportunism and something that looks much more like coordinated strategy is one that animal behavior researchers continue to debate and study. And what makes it difficult to study is that it requires exactly the kind of sustained, detailed observation that is hard to achieve in the wild. You cannot know that 6 animals are intentionally holding back until you have watched long enough to be certain they are not simply being cautious on their own account, that their restraint is genuinely linked to what the lead animals are doing. When that observation has been made carefully and thoroughly, it changes the picture. The jackal is not just a clever scavenger. It is a social tactician operating within a group structure that allows it to punch well above its individual weight class. An 8-kilogram jackal stealing from a 60-kilogram cheetah should not be possible. But it is. It happens. And when we look closely at how it happens, we see something that demands a serious recalibration of how we think about intelligence in the animal kingdom. There is a broader context here that deserves attention. The East African savanna is not just one of the most iconic landscapes on Earth. It is one of the most intensely competitive feeding environments anywhere in nature. Every calorie is contested. Every kill is a potential theft. Every predator is simultaneously a hunter and a potential victim of someone else's opportunism. In this environment, the animals that succeed are not necessarily the biggest or the fastest. They are the ones that can read the situation most accurately and respond to it most effectively. The jackal succeeds in this environment because it is flexible in a way that many larger predators are not. A lion's success depends on strength and group intimidation. A cheetah's success depends on speed and precision, but the jackal's success depends on information and adaptability. What kind of predator is this? How tired is it? How many of us are there? What is the risk-to-reward calculation right now, in this specific moment, on this specific patch of grass? These are questions that every jackal is, in some functional sense, asking all the time. And the answer the group of 8 arrived at on that morning was clear. Send 2. Hold 6. Wait. It is a masterclass in resource allocation. The 2 lead jackals absorbed all the risk of the initial engagement. They were the ones in range of a cheetah's claws. They were the ones sprinting in open ground with a large predator in pursuit. The 6 held back, conserved energy, stayed invisible, and then moved only when the moment was right, when the cheetah's attention was maximally divided and the carcass was maximally exposed. The result was that 8 animals fed on a carcass that one of them could never have taken alone. Divide the risk, share the reward. Now let us spend some time on what the jackal family structure actually looks like, because understanding it helps explain why this kind of cooperative behavior is possible in the first place. Black-backed jackals typically pair for life. The pair establishes and defends a territory that provides enough food and shelter to raise offspring, and they are among the more attentive parents in the carnivore world. Both the male and female care for pups, and in family groups with helpers, those helpers actively regurgitate food for pups, babysit when the parents hunt, and help defend the territory against rival groups and other predators. The helper system is behaviorally interesting because the helpers are suppressing their own immediate reproductive interests in favor of the group's welfare. This is not altruism in the philosophical sense. It is a strategy that works for the helper's long-term genetic success, because helping a closely related family group raise more pups means more of the helper's own genes survive, even if those genes are passing through siblings and half-siblings rather than direct offspring. This is inclusive fitness, the same principle that underlies cooperation in social insects, in meerkats, in wolves, in the complex social systems of many bird species, and it creates exactly the kind of stable, coordinated group structure that makes an 11-minute kill theft from a cheetah not just possible but, in this family's experience, probably a relatively familiar tactic. They had done something like this before. You can see it in the smoothness of the execution. There is no confusion about roles. There is no moment where the distant 6 start moving too early and alarm the cheetah. There is no breakdown in coordination between the two lead animals, where they both approach from the same angle and eliminate the cross pressure that is the whole point of the two-prong approach. Everything clicks. That kind of smooth execution does not come from instinct alone. It comes from practice. One of the most striking things about social carnivores in general is how much time young animals spend playing. What looks like frivolous tumbling and chasing is, in fact, the rehearsal of real behavioral sequences that will matter enormously when the stakes are genuine. Young jackals chase each other. They practice approaches and retreats. They test each other's responses. And in the context of a family group where theft tactics are a regular part of foraging strategy, this play may well include the kinds of movements that showed up so precisely on the day we are describing. The distraction run, the advance retreat cycle that splits a predator's attention, the sprint to the carcass in the moment the predator is occupied. These are learnable sequences, and in a group that uses them regularly, they get learned. Let us also consider what this event looked like from the gazelle herd's perspective, because that too tells us something worth knowing. The Thompson's gazelle herd from which the young male had been taken had moved off during the hunt, as prey herds do, putting distance between themselves and the predator. By the time the jackals were in full possession of the carcass, the herd had largely stabilized several hundred meters away, and individual animals were already head down, grazing again. This is not callousness. This is the maths of prey life. The threat has been expressed. One member of the herd is gone. The predator is no longer in pursuit. The probability of an immediate further attack is low, and the grass, right here, right now, needs eating. Gazelles, like all prey animals, live in a state of continuous risk management. They cannot afford to be paralyzed by the anxiety that a predator is still somewhere out there, because a gazelle that stops eating every time there is a lion somewhere within 2 kilometers will starve long before any lion catches it. They calibrate. They respond to immediate signals. Predator in sight, moving, alert, move away fast. Predator not in sight, or predator occupied with something else, resume normal activity. The herd resumed normal activity. The cheetah, walking away from the jackal group, passed within 150 meters of the gazelle herd. Several animals raised their heads and watched her. A couple bounced in that stiff-legged way that communicates alarm, but the cheetah was walking, not stalking. Her body language said nothing about hunting. The gazelles assessed it correctly and went back to grazing. This is the savanna. Everything communicates. Everything is read. Every posture and pace and direction of movement carries information that the animals around it are constantly processing and acting on. The cheetah eventually settled in the shade of a low thorn tree about 400 meters from the theft site, the same distance, interestingly, that the waiting jackals had chosen for their holding position. She spent 40 minutes there before she began to move again. She was going to have to hunt. There is a well-documented effect in cheetah populations living in areas with high jackal density, which is that cheetahs tend to feed more quickly, take more risks during feeding, and abandon kills at a lower threshold of harassment than cheetahs in areas with lower jackal pressure. In other words, cheetahs adapt their behavior in response to the consistent presence of a competitor that they cannot reliably defeat. This adaptation comes at a cost. Rushed feeding means less food consumed per kill. More frequent kill abandonment means more hunting required. More hunting means more energy expenditure and more exposure to the physical risks of high-speed chases. It is a pressure that, over years and across populations, shapes cheetah behavior in subtle but measurable ways. This is what ecologists call an interaction effect, the way the presence of one species changes the behavior and ultimately the population dynamics of another. Jackals are not just stealing meals. They are, in aggregate, across thousands of interactions over decades, influencing cheetah foraging efficiency, reproductive success, and the spatial distribution of cheetah territories. This is the kind of thing that is almost impossible to see if you are only watching individual events. It emerges from the accumulation of thousands of individual events, each one looking, from the outside, like a small drama between a handful of animals on a particular afternoon on a particular patch of savanna. But all those small dramas are connected. All of those calculations, the cheetah's assessment of when to abandon, the jackal pair's assessment of when to approach, the waiting six's sensitivity to the cue to move, are part of a vast, slow, continuously running negotiation between species over who gets what, when, and how. We are watching evolution in real time. Not the slow accumulation of generations, but the day-to-day expression of what those accumulated generations have produced. Every animal we see on the savanna is the walking result of millions of years of exactly these kinds of interactions, refined and refined again, until what remains is a set of behaviors that work well enough in enough situations to produce surviving offspring. The jackal group that stole that cheetah's kill is not special in any absolute sense. There are groups of jackals doing similar things, with similar coordination, across the savannas of East and Southern Africa right now, today. What makes this particular event worth examining in detail is what it reveals about the sophistication of the behavior, and what that sophistication tells us about the minds of animals we have, perhaps, not taken seriously enough. We have spent centuries defining human intelligence against animal cognition, always finding some new threshold, some new benchmark that separates us from them. Language, tool use, theory of mind, cultural transmission, and animals, again and again, keep turning up at those thresholds, not quite crossing them in the way we do, but getting close enough to make the line uncomfortable. Jackals cannot talk to each other. They do not hold a planning session before a kill theft. No individual jackal has a cognitive map of the operation marked out with roles and timing, but the group, through a combination of individual learning, social attention, and finely tuned sensitivity to each other's behavior, produces something that functions like a plan. The output is strategic, even if the internal process is not consciously strategic in the way we understand it, and perhaps that distinction matters less than we think. The cheetah that walked away from her kill under jackal pressure was not thinking in language either. She was not running a conscious cost-benefit analysis, but she was doing something equivalent, something that weighed the physical risk of continued conflict against the energy cost of hunting again, and arrived at the same answer that a careful, rational calculation would produce. Leave. What both species are doing is effective, and effectiveness, in nature, is the whole point. Let us return, for a final time, to that grassland scene, the 8 jackals feeding. The carcass being consumed with extraordinary efficiency by animals that are built to eat fast and eat everything. The grass around them still golden in the morning light, already heating toward the merciless afternoon that will follow. In the distance, the cheetah, resting, recovering,